Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We turn now to the mystic Trumpeter. This is poem number 3 of the 22 of From Noon to Starry Night. Now, what makes this poem significant, and there's a number of reasons why it is significant, this will be the last multi-sectional poem that we will see in Leaves of Grass. There are 8 sections. We're going to go ahead and treat this in one straight lecture, because the sections are not that long, and I think it's an important poem to be read and studied in a single setting together. Now we are here back, to the importance of music, in some ways a review of Whitman's life. A number of you have commented that Whitman is a real paradox. It's hard to tell all the time exactly whether he's a realist or an idealist. Is he this worldly? Is he otherworldly? Does he believe in the physical or the metaphysical? To what degree is he a believer in religion, or is he anti-religious? Is he a theist, or is he an agnostic? I mean, these paradoxes are constant in our study of Leaves of Grass. If you've been working as from the very beginning, there is a word, and he uses it here, and it is the word mystic. In some ways, you can see Whitman as mystic. Again, our 5 Ps didn't include prophet or priest, and obviously mystic plays with both of those ideas. So we're going to enjoy this poem in the way in which it will end. At no point in Leaves of Grass does the word utopia ever get used. However, this is the poem at the end where many readers go, this is Whitman's idea of heaven on earth. And we'll obviously talk about that perfect, the most perfect possible. And we'll enjoy his use of the word perfect, and think about the way that the word perfect gets used in some of our most precious documents. I'm thinking now, of course, of that introductory set of comments in our Constitution. That idea that there is a more perfect union that can be created. This use of perfect and perfection is fascinating. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Talks with Walt and I playlist, right from the very beginning in the inscriptions, poems, all the way up to and including a set of introductory comments to From Noon to Starry Night, and then, of course, we just finished with Faces. Now, our Nortons, as we refer back to our Nortons to give us some information, will tell us that this poem was first published in the Kansas Magazine for February 1872, which Whitman characterized in a letter to his brother Jeff on January the 22nd, 1872 as, quote, a new magazine, same style as the Atlantic, intended for Western thought and reminiscences, etc. Successfully reprinted in the 1872 volume as A Strong Bird on Pinions Free, in the 1876 Two Rivulets, and finally in its present position in Leaves of Grass 1881, where the sole change was the removal of the adjective wild before alarums in line 43. Surviving manuscripts show a great profusion of trial phrases and reworking from the first note to its final form. I love this about Whitman, that he continued to edit his stuff over the years of his poetic life. The theme is, now back to Norton's, the theme is music's inspiration, the poet choosing the trumpet, perhaps because it was, in the conch stage, one of the most ancient and primitive of instruments. The general figure is the presence of music inherent in nature, life, and the memory of things. The first 5 cantos invoke the memory of past musicians, especially those who bring back the romantic periods of history which embody the eternal dreams of lovers. But in Canto 6 begins an antiphonal theme, the heralding of war. It's ravage, it's the consequent shame of mankind. Finally comes the magnificent resolution of the concluding canto, wherein man, or humans, is redeemed, society is utopian, although, as we said, that word never gets used, and all is joy. The poem will use the word joy in the eighth canto 14 times. So we're gonna obviously play around with that one. Now, as we pick up this poem, we want to pay attention to the idea that Whitman has always been arguing through Leaves of Grass that music can invoke both the past as well as obviously talk about the future. The last 5 sections we're really going to pay attention to, because some readers have seen this as Whitman trying to come to terms with the overall trajectory of his life. That is to say, from the early days through the war days to the end days. And of course, this mystic idea will take us back where, well, obviously we're going to think about Sonnet 20, Song of Myself 23, that mystic baffling wonder, and of course learned astronomer when he looks up into the mystic moist night air. Let's go to passage number 1. He begins with the word hark, which takes us back to pent-up aching rivers, hark close. Hark, some wild trumpeter. 8 times, by the way, this trumpeter will get used in this poem. Some strange musician. Now, this idea of strange musician will take us back to Proud Music of the Storm. Obviously, we're gonna play this game. By the way, trumpeter gets used one more time in Leaves of Grass, in the Songs of Parting, when we get to Soldiers there. Hovering, is an echo from Song of Universal 3. Hovering unseen in air, vibrates, only time in all Leaves of Grass that word gets used, it's right here. Vibrates capricious tunes tonight. Now, capricious you'll remember from Song of Myself 22. Notice the immediacy of tonight. I hear thee, trumpeter, listening alert, I catch thy notes. Now, notice the repetition of now here, 3 times. Now, pouring, whirling, like a tempest, back to Proud Music of the Storm 6, round me, now low, subdued, now in the distance, lost. In other words, there's this, you're kind of hearing it, and then you're not hearing it, and then you're hearing it, and then you're not hearing it. I love that he uses the word tempest. I mean, at 3a, think about the power of his using the word tempest as it relates, of course, to Shakespeare's wonderful offering of 1611. And what is it that he does there? We've given full lectures on this at learnstrong.net. Well, Shakespeare's saying goodbye. All right, he is the Prospero laying down, of course, his wand, laying down his pen. And I think here this word tempest is used intentionally, I think, for Whitman as well. He's coming to the end of the deathbed edition, and he's already ready to start to recognize that's exactly what's happening. Now on to passage 2. There's the word come. I told you it's the first word in the deathbed edition of Leaves of Grass, and we keep coming back to it, don't we? No pun intended. Come nearer, bodiless one. We're already to mysticism, right? Come nearer, bodiless one. Happily in thee, notice his use of the word happily. And we're going to end with the word joy, right? Happily in thee resounds some dead composer. Happily thy pensive life, think about his use of the word pensive in Leaves of Grass, was filled with aspirations high, uniformed ideals. We're going to come to these ideals in our study of Plato later in this poem. Waves, oceans musical, chaotically surging, that now ecstatic ghost. We're going to have this ecstatic game being played at the end in passage 8. Of course, the word ghost is interesting because we're going to have phantoms by the time we get to passage 5. Close to me, bending. Again, I told you guys his use of this word bending and the hugging and all of that. Go back to Song of Myself 11 to see his bending arch, right? Thy cornet echoing, remember cornet from Song of Myself 18, pealing, gives out to no one's ears but mine. In other words, I'm the only one that can hear this. This takes me back to Keats's Urn. And I think Ode on a Grecian Urn, I think the life of Keats is central to a reading of Leaves of Grass. But for sure, Ode on a Grecian Urn, you'll remember that. Heard melodies are sweet, but those unheard are sweeter. Therefore, you saw pipes play on, right? Not to the central airs, but to spirit ditties, right? And all of that is part of the mysticism that's happening here, right? This idea of thy cornet echoing, pealing, gives out to one's ears mine, but no one's ears but mine, but freely gives to mine that I may thee translate. You remember how he says this in Song of Myself 6, I wish I could translate, right, the heads. The idea of translation is I think in many readers' estimation, one of the central words of Leaves of Grass. Allow me to translate for you what all of this pain, if we're talking of theodicy, what pain, all this pain actually means. Stop asking why did it happen to us. Start learning how to ask why did it happen for us. That is a mystical enterprise. That is the game that he'll play here in this poem. Part 3. Blow, trumpeter, free and clear I follow thee. Now we're going to get to this free here later with this word free. I follow thee, while at thy liquid prelude, glad, serene, think about his use of serene and the idea of serene in Leaves of Grass. The fretting world, you'll remember fretting from Proud Music of the Storm 4. The fretting world, the streets, the noisy hours of day withdrawn. And then he uses this word, a holy calm. We're going to get to this word again here in passage 4. You'll remember in Song of Myself 24, I make holy whatever I touch. A holy calm descends like dew upon me. Think about the power of Leaves of Grass being the name of the collection where this poem exists. Like dew upon me. I walk in cool, refreshing night, the walks of paradise. Now we're toward Dante, obviously, in the third section of the Divine Commedia with Paradiso, right? I scent the grass, and here we are. And again, I think I've said this to you, I think that Whitman is laughing, smiling all the way through. We're going to get to laughter here at the end of this poem. But I think he's smiling all the way through. He's having such fun. And here it is. He throws the grass in, the moist air, going back again to learned astronomer, and the roses. Thy song expands my numbed, embodied spirit. This is a nilgism, Norton's will tell us, of Whitman's confined or fettered spirit. In other words, trapped spirit. Thou freest launchest me. You'll remember his use of the word launch just even recently in several of the poems we studied. Floating, back to Song of Myself 11, right, in those swimmers that are floating and basking upon heaven's lake. Now it's interesting to me that he uses the word heaven, because by passage 8 we're going to get to this idea of heaven on earth, and it'll be fascinating to study it. Now, at part 4, many have seen that Whitman is beginning to kind of think of his life through this poem, and we'll concentrate now on the early days. There was a child went forth will come to mind. Blow again, trumpeter. And for my sensuous eyes, bring the old pageants, show the feudal world. Now, in other words, he's going to see here's the march of history. We've seen this so often in Leaves of Grass. What charm thy music works. Now, this idea of charm will become the spell in passage 6. Thou makest pass before me. That, again, Proud Music of the Storm comes to mind. Ladies and cavaliers long dead, barons are in their castle halls, the troubadours are singing, armed knights go forth to redress wrongs, some in quest of the Holy Grail. Obviously, we're joining not only the Beowulf and the idea of the ancient Anglo-Saxon Scot, but obviously as well the stories of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. You'll remember Grail gets mentioned in Song of the Exposition 3. I see, notice all these I sees. I see the tournament. I see the contestants encased in heavy armor, seated on stately chomping horses. Hear the celebration of war. In a little bit, it will obviously be the horrors of war. I hear the shouts, the sounds of blows and smiting steel. I see the crusaders, tumultuous armies. Hark, how the cymbals clang. Again, we're back to drum taps. Lo, where the monks walk in advance, bearing the cross on high. I think it is significant that he uses the word monk here. I do. And I think because he's in this mystic kind of ecstasy by the end of the poem, Whitman as priest for sure comes to mind. Now from here we go to passage 5, where love gets used 13 times in this section alone. This is maybe the ecstasy of Whitman and his early Leaves of Grass. Some have seen it that way. Blow again, trumpeter. And for thy theme, take now the enclosing theme of all. Notice his use of the word all. We've commented on all the way through Leaves of Grass, but certainly in this poem. Of all, the solvent and the setting. Love, that is the pulse of all. The sustenance and the pain. The heart of man and woman. All for love. It'll be significant that here he starts with love and he ends with joy. No other theme but love. You'll remember that earlier in Leaves of Grass he said the only theme of his book was war. Now it's love, right? Knitting, I told you about his clasping, grasping, hugging, all of that. Knitting, enclosing, all diffusing love, right? Oh, how the immortal phantoms from Ghost of Phantoms crowd around me. And obviously, readers of Whitman's day would know, I mean, you guys know it because we've studied the Odyssey and obviously the Aeneid, where in the underworld, the hero will have these phantoms that come at him. Obviously, the visit of Odysseus to the underworld comes to mind the most. So he's got these phantoms around him, crowd around me. I see the vast alembic ever working. And by the way, this is the only use of alembic in the entire Leaves of Grass, right? That distilling apparatus. He uses a chemistry term here. I see and know the flames that heat the world. In other words, we're heating up a solution. It's remarkable. The glow, the blush, the beating hearts of lovers, so blissfully happy some and some so silent, dark and nigh to death. Love, that is all the earth to lovers. Love that mocks time and space. Again, Song of Myself 46, I know I have the best of time and space. Love, that is day and night. Love, that is sun and moon and stars. Again, notice noon to starry night, right? Love, that is crimson. Notice all of his colors, always in leaves of grass. Sumptuous, sick with perfume. Remember the aroma of armpits. No other words but words of love. No other thought but love. Now it is Whitman that, as the great theologian, and I've argued that Whitman is one of the great theologians, Whitman always argued that there's basically two views of God in the Christian New Testament. Of course, to say that God loves, that's a word picture that anybody can understand if one has had a loving relationship in one's life, right? God is Father, God is Mother, God loves. But the second view for Whitman is more profound, because the Christian New Testament will argue that God is love. And that is a profoundly disturbing idea. How are you going to put that in a word picture? Notice here, I think for Whitman, when he uses the word love, he's often talking about some kind of transpersonal view of deity. And here it is, the repetition of love, love, love. Now in passage 6, we're going to begin to turn dark. And for 6 and 7, we're going to see it. That Whitman is no just blind idealist, contrary to what passage 8 is going to suggest for us. No, I think Whitman gets it. I think Whitman understands, hey, yeah, there is the sunny side, but there's also the dark side. There is the noon side, but there's also the night side, as in the cluster itself. Passage 6, blow again, trumpeter, conjure, wars, alarms. Now, of course, earlier we had these wars, right, the blows and the smiting steel. There is, of course, in the Iliad, no question, Whitman was acutely aware of this, the celebration of fighting and smiting steel. But there's also, of course, the other side. People who look at the Iliad, as we've said in our lectures, our full lectures on all of the Iliad at learnstrong.net, people who say of the Iliad, oh, it's nothing but a song of war and the glorification of war and battle. That is absolutely not true. And, of course, here, we're going to get the same thing, the alarms now of war. Swift to thy spell, notice earlier it was a charm. A shuddering hum like distant thunder rolls. Obviously, we've heard these kinds of images before in Leaves of Grass. Lo, where the armed men hasten, lo, mid the clouds of dust. Go back and look at how he uses dusk in Drum Traps, right? The glint of bayonets. Of course, this takes us back to Song of Myself 34, as well as a march in the ranks. You'll remember this, the glint of torches. Now it's bayonets. Of course, how he uses bayonets in Drum Taps, we've already talked about. I see. Now we're going to get the vision. I see the grime-faced cannoneers. I mark the rosy flash, where earlier it was crimson, now it's rosy. Flash amid the smoke. I hear the cracking of the guns. Nor war alone, notice the dash. Thy fearful music song, wild player, brings every sight of fear. The deeds of ruthless brigands, rapine, murder. I hear the cries for help. Remember, I sit and look out. I see ships foundering at sea. I behold on deck and below deck the terrible tableaus. Foundering gets used right one time in Leaves of Grass, and it's right here. You'll remember from Whispers of Heavenly Death that word, that poem thought. And do you remember that the ship that's sinking and the women who are gone? Do you remember this? It takes us back to that set of lines. And you'll remember tableaus used in City of Orgies. Of course, here is our theodicy. In other words, Whitman is ready to ask, why must there be such human pain and suffering, especially associated with war or with acts like the sinking of a ship? We commented on this at Whispers of Heavenly Death in that poem thought. And now to passage 7, which makes sense, Whitman's despair. Before we get to Whitman's adulation and ecstasy, we got to go through the despair. So here we go, Whitman's despair as poet. O trumpeter, he continues now, passage 7. O trumpeter, methinks I am myself the instrument thou playest. Thou meltest my heart. Only time that word gets used, meltest, in all of Leaves of Grass. My brain, notice the dash. Thou movest, drawest, changest, notice his trinities, them at will. And now thy sullen notes, you'll remember sullen from Song of Myself 43. Send darkness through me. Again, this is the despair. Thou takest away all cheering light, all hope. I see the enslaved, the overthrown, the hurt, the oppressed of the whole earth. Now, go back to Song of the Open Road and several other places where Whitman gives these kinds of lists of the horrors of this world. There they all are. From, of course, the horrors of slavery up through and including, obviously, the oppressed, the hurt. I feel the measureless shame and humiliation of my race. Some have asked me, why are you giving lectures over every poem of Leaves of Grass in this time and in this place, to use Whitman's language? And I argue, here it is. This is it. Whitman is able to hold in the palm of his linguistic hand both sides of the equation of democracy. Of course it's amazing. Of course those lines Jefferson wrote in the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of Scooby snacks. Of course that's precious to us. But there's the other side. The man who wrote those lines, he owned slaves. There are both sides. Whitman will remind us we've got to hold both in our psyche if we're going to appreciate what it is to be an American and obviously to be a human of this world. And so here it is. He says, I feel the measureless shame and humiliation of my race. It becomes all mine. And this is one of the points, I think, of reading Leaves of Grass. Guys, this is one of the points of your education. It's to give you both sides of the cultural coin. We have to have it, of course, as we've pointed out. There's way more sides than 2 to a quarter, isn't there? There's not only the 2 sides, but there's the side of the quarter itself, which of itself has multiple sides. And obviously there's an inside, an outside, an upside, and a downside. On we go, right? Mine too. Notice the repetition of mine. Mine too. The revenges of humanity. The wrongs of ages. Obviously he's thinking now about his own Civil War, right? Baffled feuds. Only time. In all Leaves of Grass, feuds gets used. It's right here. We think obviously of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, for example. Baffled feuds and hatreds, right? Obviously the Civil War comes to mind. The Hatfields and the McCoys come to mind. I mean, any number of feuds, right? Obviously the political feuds that are a part of Whitman's day, obviously a part of our day as well. He says, I'm ashamed of all of that. Utter defeat upon me weighs. This will take us back to our study of Shelley's Ode to the West Wind. And he says in part 4, it's just like a weight is on his, as